What's poppin', gamers? Today we have a very important subject that is very close to my heart. Mainly because I almost hung myself in 8th grade trying to write an 8-page paper on it. But today we are going to be talking about a tale of two Algerias. I mean, cities. So, yeah, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, A Tale of Two Cities was published in 1859 by one Charles Huffam Dickens. He's a pretty niche writer. You may or may not have heard of him for some of his works like The Pickwick Papers or, let's see here, American Notes for General Circulation. Anyways, there are two things you need to know about Dickens before we get into the book. Number one, he worked in a bootblacking factory for 3 years when he was 12 years old, which may or may not explain his adversity to child labor. And number two, he was a massive nerd. I mean, look at that face. Are you telling me if you saw him walking down the hall in high school, you don't want to just like tug his beard or something? Or spit in his mouth? I don't know. Anyways, and the whole child labor thing, like, alright, I get it. You had a rough time in the bootblacking factory. But as a, big proponent of child labor myself, I would just suggest putting in those 3 years at a Denny's. Best years of your life, brother. Okay, the book. The picturesque protagonist of A Tale of Two Cities is one Charles Darnay, a young, dashing French aristocrat who decides to give up his heritage in order to live a quiet life in London with the lovely Lucy Bennet. The antagonist is one Madame Defarge, who, for some reason, wants to murder Charles Darnay because of his heritage. And then you've also got Dr. Manette, Jarvis Lorry, Mr. Scriver, Jerry Cruncher, the Three Jooks, Marquis St. Evermond, Mr. Defarge, and the greatest character in all of literature, Sidney Carton. Now, you guys are going to have to excuse me because I'm kind of a simp for Sidney Carton. If I could, I would make this video all about him, but I need to kind of control myself, so if I start to stray, please slap me. Anyways, the setting. Now, the book mainly takes place in between London and Paris, France, as well as a unnamed country or state in France. Now, I know what you're thinking. Living in France is already punishment enough. But imagine this. Living in France during the Reign of Terror. Yeah. That's like living in Brazil during soccer season. Or living in Russia when Jake Paul shows up. Or living in Gary, Indiana. Just at any time. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age when you could plagiarize entire novels from bipolar people. It was the age of LeBron. It was the age where my mic keeps fucking clipping out. Fucking stupid. Anyways. Our book begins with Jarvis Lorry and Lucy Manette traveling from Paris to France. Wait, what? Traveling from London to Paris after receiving a letter describing that Dr. Alexander Manette, Lucy's estranged father, is still alive after being imprisoned in the Bastille for 18 years. When they arrive, they find the doctor being cared for by Ernest Defarge and his wife, Madame Defarge, our antagonist. The doctor is in a sad condition, and for some reason keeps making shoes, which corresponds to his time in the prison, where he was a shoemaker. Dude, Dickens has something with feet, I swear. Mr. Lorry and Lucy take him back to England, where he eventually returns to his normal self. 5 years later, Mr. Charles Darnay is on trial, being accused of being a French spy by Roger Clyde and John Barsad. They both testify that they would recognize Charles Darnay anywhere. However, his lawyers, Sidney Carton, yes, and Mr. Stryver, indicate that Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton bear a strong resemblance. Therefore, they could not be sure that the man that they saw was Charles Darnay. Now, this is very important. Remember this for later. After the trial, Darnay, Carton, and Stryver all become best friends with the Manettes, and they hang out with Lucy a lot. All of them fall in love with her. However, Sidney Carton confesses his love to Lucy, realizing that his drunken and apathetic ways are not worthy of her love and kindness. However, he pledges that he would gladly give his life whenever she needs it most. Literally the greatest character of all time. Sorry. However, eventually Darnay is the one who manages to secure with Lucy. They fall in love and become married. And that's the end of the first book. Meanwhile, the situation in Paris is going from bad to a lot worse. The Marquis Saint-Evremont, who is Darnay's uncle, runs over a child with his carriage in Paris, and then he gives the father a coin. Yup, I could not make this shit up. Anyways, Darnay, who's working as a French teacher in England, receives a letter that his uncle is dead and that he has essentially inherited his title and his entire estate, which he proceeds to renounce. Now, as the revolution erupts in 1789, in July, Darnay receives a letter from his uncle's old steward, desperately, requiring assistance because he's been captured, and he begs Darnay to come to France. And Darnay, because he's a fucking idiot, decides to go. When he reaches France, he's immediately arrested and taken to Le Force prison, where he's held without any hope of a trial whatsoever. Dr. Manette, Lucy, and Mr. Lorry soon arrive in Paris as well, where Dr. Manette, who has a ton of clout from being in the Bastille for a while, I don't know, he somehow manages to get a trial for Darnay and testifies, allowing Darnay to go free. However, Darnay, because he's an idiot, gets arrested again in an hour, mainly because of the accusations of the Defarges. Remember Madame Defarge and Ernest Defarge, who were the former servants of Dr. Manette? Now, the next day, Darnay is tried again, and this time the Defarges happen to have a letter written by Dr. Manette when he, many years ago, condemning all Saint-Evremonts because that they murdered Madame Defarge's entire family. And this is why she has such a strong hatred for the Evremonts, Darnay is sentenced to death, essentially, and Dr. Manette goes back to being weird and making shoes. Now, I know what you're thinking, alright, this is a terrible situation. There's no way that they can get out of this. They're all going to get their heads chopped off. That's what you would think. Enter Sidney Carton. Yeah, that's right. This badass rolls up in Paris, okay? He hears about everything that's going on. He also hears there's a plot contrived to send Lucy and her newborn daughter to the guillotine. Alright? And he rolls up his sleeves, and as my mic clips again, he goes ahead and remembers one thing. That he bears a striking resemblance to Darnay, and that he promised to help out Lucy in her time of need. So he breaks into La Force, where Darnay is being held. He switches clothes with him, spirits him out of there really quickly, and goes to the guillotine in his stead. And as Mr. Lorry shepherds Darnay, Lucy, and Dr. Manette and their daughter out of France, Sidney goes to the guillotine a happy man. Literally the greatest character of all time.